This is the only photograph that I've ever seen of Henry Peter and Eva Catherine Simmon, who emigrated to the United States from Germany with their first 7 children in 1833. The story of Peter and Catherine and their journey from war-torn 19th century Germany to the Midwest of the United States has become family legend over the generations. Eva Catherine, the legend holds, was born in a castle under siege in the late summer or early fall of 1795. The story goes that her father was a nobleman, and her birth took place in a hidden room inside a castle where the women and children were secreted during the siege. Peter was the son of a farmer, or a tanner, depending on which source you believe. And as a young man, he was conscripted into Napoleon Bonaparte's army, where he supposedly served in a capacity similar to that of commissary sergeant. All of Peter's brothers were killed in wars, according to the story. Peter and Catherine were married in 1813 in Meisenheim in what is now Germany. They had 7 children before leaving Meisenheim and emigrating to the United States in 1833, just as their oldest son, Philip, was entering his teenage years. According to family legend, the journey to America was lengthy and perilous. Once in the United States, the couple had 2 more children, and the family eventually settled in Rock Island County, Illinois. The story's most compelling bits, Eva Catherine's supposed nobility, the castle under siege, the Napoleonic intrigue, and the perilous sea voyage, are difficult to verify with original source documentation. The earliest mention I've been able to find for these events is from 1933, some 100 years after the family's arrival in America. This 1933 account was given to the family by Mrs. Maria Simmon Darling, daughter of Philip Simmon, who was the oldest child of Peter and Catherine. Aunt Maria claims that the story comes from records kept by her father. I have never seen these original records, and they were not included in the exhaustive 1988 3-volume Simmon Family History compiled by Shirley Ann Baker Hunter, so I must assume they no longer exist. That got me wondering if there may be other ways to get at the relative truth of these stories. Perhaps some historical perspective would shed light on the larger context and circumstances of the family legend. As it happens, I know a guy who can help.
Bill, we are recording.
Max Orr is a friend of mine who I've known since the early 1990s.
I am currently the executive director for Carolina Public Humanities and a teaching professor in the history department at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. I have a PhD in modern European history.
It turns out the various key dates of the Simmon family story correspond to extremely significant years politically in the region the family hails from. Take, for example, the supposed circumstances of Eva Catherine's birth. According to Maria Simmon Darling's account, Eva Catherine was born in Germany in the autumn of 1795. Her parents, who were of the nobility, lived in a castle. The castle was besieged, so the old men, women, and children were put into a secret room. While in this room, Eva Catherine von Medard was born. Von Medard means of Medard. Medard is a small hamlet just 2 miles from the family home of Meisenheim, and the autumn of 1795 was indeed a time of war and sieges in that area. The War of the First Coalition was underway, in which a loose association of European powers went to war with the newly established French Republic.
You know, Medard, as I think I mentioned to you, was and still is a teeny place. And so the idea of a formal siege, in terms of the military terminology at the time, seems unlikely to me.
However, the immediate vicinity of Meisenheim and Medard did see some legitimate sieges in the fall of 1795, including the Battle of Mainz and the Siege of Mannheim.
This was a very volatile area. The Rhine campaigns were going full steam in 1795 and 1796. This area in 1806 was completely annexed by France and literally became departments of the French Empire.
Peter served in the French army, and according to family lore, he was a great defender of Napoleon even later in life.
And he would have been in the French army as a citizen of the French Empire.
He supposedly held a rank comparable to commissary sergeant.
To get that particular job, you're hated by the army, but it's a relatively safe and relatively cushy job. You're around food and you're around all that. So it would also be interesting to know, like, did he serve in the of course, in the Russian campaign? In that particular case, nobody had it easy. But again, he would be back with supply lines, right? Organizing stuff and bringing it up. They weren't the people that actually move the food. They were the people that collected the food, or they collected supplies and got it organized for then to be brought up to the front line. So you're always going to be further back.
Peter and Catherine were married in the summer of 1813, when Peter was 20 years old and Catherine was 18.
And certainly what happens in 1813, Bill, is with Germany, I can't stress this enough, is that Germany's great moment of national awakening happens against Napoleon. To this day, the Germans refer to it as the War of German Liberation. People around your ancestors' age, around Peter's age, would have been equally swayed by this new sort of German romantic nationalism.
Some accounts of Peter's life suggest that he had some number of brothers, all of whom had been killed in military service. Given the surge of German nationalism in the area, it's uncertain which side his brothers may have fought for.
There were plenty of Germans who were not happy being suddenly in the French Empire, who would have, left those areas, especially because of the incredible conscription that was going on. Napoleon annexed these areas, and Napoleon's insatiable appetite for troops would always, up the conscription demands. So plenty of young people, this is true in France and Germany, wherever Napoleon's, hands were reaching, were draft dodgers and leaving. And so it's possible they could have left to another polity. There are plenty of German polities, certainly Prussia and others that would have been fighting against Napoleon at the time.
After Napoleon was overthrown and the area around Meisenheim reverted to local rule, Peter took up farming, and he and Catherine began raising a family. By the early 1830s, they had 7 children, and the time had come for the family to leave Germany behind.
The era that we're talking about, from 1815 to when your ancestors left Germany, was a counter-revolutionary, reactionary period in which it was very much up against something called the Carlsbad Decrees of 1819, signed with the German Confederation of States, largely washed over by Prussia and Austria, that really censored the press, got rid of liberal professors, didn't allow for freedom of speech, cracked down on student societies.
Peter and Catherine's eldest child, Philip, was 14 years old in 1833. If, as family lore tells us, Peter had lost all of his several brothers to war, then, given the political situation in the area where the family lived, it's no surprise that they would have chosen to seek a more peaceful life in America, if only to spare their sons from the dangers of military service.
Life became considerably more repressive starting in 1833 in Germany. Those Carlsbad decrees were re-emphasized. Those were first signed in 1819. They were re-emphasized and new clauses put in, especially on censorship of the press, especially in that area that you're talking about, which did have a sort of more open society. So it would be a moment to leave if you're sort of tied into the political waves that are going on around you. There was a revolution of 1830, which toppled the regime in France, uprisings in Belgium, there were uprisings in Poland, there were disturbances in Italy. So it was one of these sort of France sneezes and all of Europe gets a cold moments. It doesn't seem like a random date to leave that particular area.
The Simmon family landed at the port of Baltimore in late June of 1833, not in November, as some accounts claim. They spent a few years in Pennsylvania and a few more in Ohio before ultimately settling in Rock Island County in the early 1850s. 7 of Peter and Catherine's 9 children went on to have families of their own, and as I record these words, the number of direct descendants is certainly numbered in the thousands. Thank you for watching, and if you are a descendant of Peter and Catherine's and would like to know more about their history and legacy, more information is available at simmonfamily.net. There's also a Facebook group for direct descendants and their spouses. If you have additional information or resources that shed light on the family's history, please reach out and let us know.